Nobody talks about the ozone hole anymore. Not on the news, not at school, not online. And that is strange, because back in the 1980s, this was one of the scariest discoveries in the history of our planet. Scientists had found a real hole, ripped into the invisible shield that wraps around the entire Earth. This was not a small tear. At its biggest, it grew larger than the whole continent of Antarctica. It was bigger than the United States, bigger than Europe. You could have dropped almost 3 whole USA's worth of land inside it and still had room left over. And here is the part that will really get you. Nobody put that hole there on purpose. No bomb caused it, no war caused it. It was made by things sitting in your bathroom cabinet right now. Things like hairspray. Things like the fridge humming quietly in your kitchen. Everyday stuff used by regular people was quietly tearing a hole in the sky above one of the coldest, most empty places on Earth. Scientists ran the numbers and the future looked terrifying. If nothing changed, that hole was not going to stay over the frozen bottom of the world. It was going to spread. Some experts warned that within a few decades, the hole could stretch across the entire globe. Sunlight itself, the same sunlight that grows our food and warms our skin, was going to turn dangerous almost everywhere on Earth. We are talking about a level of danger that is hard to picture. Doctors warned that skin cancer cases could skyrocket. Eye diseases that make people go blind were expected to explode in number. Crops that feed billions of people were at risk of failing in the fields. Some scientists even used the word uninhabitable when they talked about what parts of our planet could become. Stop and really sit with that word for a second. Uninhabitable. That means a place where people, animals, and plants simply cannot survive anymore. And scientists were using that word about planet Earth, our home, the only one we have got. So here is the real question this video is going to answer. If the hole in the sky was truly this dangerous, why did the warnings just stop? Did the hole disappear on its own? Did scientists get the whole thing wrong? Or did something else happen? Something almost nobody expects when they hear a story about humans messing up the planet. The truth is stranger and honestly more hopeful than you might think. But to understand how something this dangerous simply stopped being a threat, we first need to understand what this invisible shield actually is and why losing even a small piece of it could have been such a disaster. Before we get into that, if stories like this one grab you, the kind where something almost destroys the planet and then gets fixed in a way you never saw coming, hit that subscribe button. This channel digs into true science stories that sound made up but are completely real, and trust me, this is far from the last one you will want to see. All right, let's get into it. What exactly is this shield we are talking about, and why does a hole in it matter so much? Section 1. Earth's invisible force field. Think about the sky above you right now. It looks like nothing. Empty space. Maybe some clouds, maybe some blue. But that sky is doing something for you every single second of your life, and you never even notice it. High above the clouds, way higher than any airplane you have ever flown in, there's a thin layer of gas wrapped around the entire Earth. Scientists call it the ozone layer. Think of it like an invisible force field, stretched around our whole planet like the peel around an orange. This force field is made of a special kind of oxygen. You already know regular oxygen, the stuff you breathe every time you take a breath. Regular oxygen is made of 2 oxygen bits stuck together, but way up high, something a little different forms. 3 oxygen bits stick together instead of 2. That special 3-piece version is called ozone. Here is the wild part. This thin, barely there layer of gas is blocking almost all of the most dangerous rays coming from the sun. We are talking about blocking around 98% of the harmful rays that would otherwise come blasting straight down onto our skin, our eyes, our farms, and every living thing on Earth. Let that sink in, 98%. Without that thin layer, the sun would not just give us a bad sunburn, it would cook the surface of our planet with radiation strong enough to damage the tiny building blocks inside every living cell. And here is something that might surprise you. This shield is not thick at all. If you could somehow scoop up every bit of ozone in the sky and spread it evenly across the entire surface of the Earth, it would only be about as thick as 2 coins stacked on top of each other. That is it. That is the entire barrier, standing between life on Earth and the harshest rays the sun can throw at us. So why does it matter so much if something this thin gets damaged? Because thin does not mean weak. Think of it like the glass in a car windshield. It looks thin too, but it is doing a huge job keeping wind, bugs, and rocks from smashing into your face while you drive. Damage that glass even a little, and suddenly it cannot do its job properly anymore. The sun's rays come in different types. Most of the light you see is totally harmless. It is the light that lets you see colors, read the sentence, and enjoy a sunny day. But hidden inside sunlight is another type of ray, one you cannot see with your own eyes. These are called ultraviolet rays, or UV rays for short. You have probably heard that word on sunscreen bottles before. Some UV rays are the reason people get sunburned or need sunscreen at the beach. But there are other types of UV rays that are far more dangerous. These stronger rays can damage the tiny code inside our cells that tells our bodies how to grow and heal properly. When that code gets damaged too much, it can lead to skin cancer, eye diseases, and weaker immune systems that struggle to fight off sickness. These stronger, nastier UV rays are actually so powerful that hospitals use them on purpose sometimes in tightly controlled ways to kill germs and clean surfaces. Imagine a ray of light so strong it can be used to sterilize a hospital room. Now imagine that same kind of ray pouring down freely across farms, forests, oceans, and cities with nothing standing in its way. That is exactly what the ozone layer stops from happening. It sits way up in the sky and takes the hit for us, soaking up almost all of the dangerous rays before they ever reach the ground. Without it, scientists believe the surface of our planet would become incredibly hostile to life as we know it. So now you can probably guess why finding a giant hole punched into this shield sent shockwaves through the science world. This was not some small, easy-to-fix problem. This was a hole in the exact thing keeping Earth safe from the sun's harshest weapon. To understand how something this important could possibly get damaged, we need to go back and follow the trail scientists followed, because at first, almost nobody even knew where to look. Section 2, the everyday villain. Nobody suspected. Here is something that makes this story even crazier. The thing that tore a hole in Earth's shield was not some rare, exotic chemical locked away in a secret lab. It was something completely normal, something people used every single day without a second thought. Back in the 1900s, scientists invented a group of chemicals that seemed almost magical at the time. These chemicals did not catch fire easily. They were not poisonous to touch. They were cheap to make and easy to use. Because of that, companies started putting them into all sorts of everyday products. They went into refrigerators to keep food cold. They went into air conditioners to keep homes cool in the summer. They went into spray cans, the kind used for hairspray, deodorant, and other sprays people used every morning while getting ready for their day. For decades, everyone thought these chemicals were completely safe. Scientists at the time genuinely believed there was nothing to worry about. Nobody was trying to hurt the planet. People were just trying to keep their food fresh and their hair looking nice. But here is where things start to feel like something out of a mystery movie. In the 1970s, two scientists sat down and started asking a question almost nobody else was asking. What actually happens to these chemicals after we use them and throw the can away or replace the fridge? These scientists figured out that these chemicals do not just disappear. Little bits of them slowly drift upward, higher and higher, all the way up into the sky where the ozone layer lives. And once they get up there, something dangerous starts to happen. When these chemicals reach that high up layer, sunlight breaks them apart. This releases tiny particles that are incredibly good at destroying ozone. And we are not talking about a small amount of damage. One single one of these released particles can destroy over 100,000 ozone molecules before it is finally done. Think about that number for a second. 100,000. One tiny particle, invisible to the human eye, floating around up in the sky, wiping out molecule after molecule of the very shield protecting our planet. And people had been sending these chemicals up into the sky for decades without knowing any of this was happening. At the time these two scientists shared their discovery, almost nobody believed them. Companies that made these chemicals pushed back hard. Some people in the industry mocked the idea and said it sounded like made-up science fiction. The scientists were basically told they were wrong and should stop worrying everyone over nothing. But a few years later, something happened that made it impossible to ignore anymore. A team of scientists working down at a freezing, isolated research station near the bottom of the world started digging through years of old measurements. And what they found sent a chill through the entire science community. The ozone layer above that frozen region had been shrinking, not just a tiny bit. It had dropped by around a third compared to just a few years earlier. Something was eating away at the sky, and it was happening fast. Other scientists rushed down to that same frozen region to figure out exactly what was going on. They set up special equipment and started measuring the air itself. What they found matched exactly what those two mocked scientists had predicted years before. The chemicals from fridges and spray cans really were destroying the ozone layer, just like they said. Suddenly, the scientists who had been laughed at and dismissed were proven completely right. Years later, they were even given one of the biggest awards in all of science for figuring this out before anyone else believed them. So now the mystery of what was tearing a hole in the sky was solved. But that raised a whole new question. If these chemicals were being used all over the entire world in cities everywhere, why was the hole forming specifically over one of the most empty, remote places on the entire planet? Almost nobody even lives there. To understand why the hole formed exactly where it did, we need to follow those chemicals on their long, strange journey through the sky. Section 3. Why the coldest place on Earth took the hit. Here's a question that stumped a lot of people at first. If these harmful chemicals were coming from cities, fridges, and spray cans all across the world, mostly from places like North America, Europe, and Asia, then why in the world did the hole show up over the frozen, empty land near the bottom of the planet? A place with almost no people, almost no fridges, and almost no hairspray users at all. The answer has everything to do with wind and cold, and honestly, once you understand it, it makes a strange kind of sense. Earth's sky is not still. It is constantly moving, swirling and mixing, kind of like water stirred in a giant bowl. So even though most of these harmful chemicals were released in busy, crowded parts of the world, wind patterns slowly carried tiny traces of them all around the globe. Eventually, some of that drifted all the way down toward the freezing region near the bottom of the Earth. And that frozen region happens to have something no other place on Earth really has. During its long, dark winter, temperatures drop so low that they are hard to even imagine. Add to that a powerful ring of freezing wind that spins around the region every winter, almost like a giant swirling wall, trapping incredibly cold air inside it. Inside that freezing swirl, strange icy clouds start to form high up in the sky. These clouds create the perfect hiding spot for the harmful chemicals to gather and wait. All through the long, dark winter months, they sit there quietly, slowly getting ready to cause trouble. Then spring arrives, and sunlight finally returns to that frozen region after months of total darkness. That sunlight is exactly what triggers the damage. It gives the trapped chemicals the energy they need to start breaking apart and destroying ozone at an incredibly fast rate. Within weeks, the hole rips open wider and wider, growing bigger every single day the sun stays out. This is exactly why the hole was not a permanent thing sitting there all year long. It would grow huge during that region's spring season, then shrink back down as summer arrived and the freezing swirl of wind finally broke apart. Then, the very next year, as winter rolled back around, the whole terrifying cycle would begin all over again. Now, here is the part that made scientists especially nervous. Even though the hole mostly stayed over that one frozen, empty region, it did not always stay put perfectly. Sometimes, strange finger-like stretches of the hole would drift out and pass briefly over cities and nearby countries. There were real moments where people living in certain cities were warned to stay indoors because the sunlight outside had become dangerously strong. Try to imagine that for a second. A regular news warning telling families in a city to keep their kids inside, not because of a storm or an earthquake, but because the sunlight itself had become too dangerous to stand under safely. And this is where the story gets even scarier, because scientists were not just worried about that one region. They warned that if absolutely nothing changed, the damage would not stay contained near the bottom of the world forever. Some experts predicted that within a few decades, the hole could stretch out and cover the entire planet, not just one remote corner of it. If that had actually happened, some scientists predicted that in certain major cities, stepping outside without protection could cause a serious sunburn in as little as 5 minutes. Not 5 hours, 5 minutes. Skin cancer cases were expected to skyrocket. Crops that farmers depend on to feed entire countries were at serious risk of failing. And to make matters even more frustrating, these harmful chemicals do not break down quickly once they are released. Some of them can stick around in the sky for over 50 years. Others can linger for well over a century. That means even if every single use of these chemicals stopped instantly, the damage already sitting up in the sky would keep causing harm for decades afterward. So by the late 1980s, the picture looked genuinely terrifying. A hole bigger than entire countries tearing open every single year. A group of everyday chemicals responsible, chemicals used constantly in homes across the world. And a ticking clock, because the damage already released was going to keep hurting the sky for generations, no matter what anyone did next. At this point, if you were living through this moment in history, you might reasonably assume this was simply the beginning of an unstoppable disaster. Something too big, too global, and too tied into everyday life to ever actually get fixed. But here's where this story takes a turn that very few disaster stories ever take. And it is the reason we do not hear about this hole constantly today. Section 4. How the entire world actually fixed it. Here's the moment where this story flips completely upside down, and honestly, it might be one of the most surprising twists in modern history. When world leaders and scientists realized just how serious this threat really was, something happened that almost never happens. Countries that usually argue about almost everything actually came together and agreed on something huge and fast. In 1987, representatives from countries all around the entire world signed onto a single agreement. This agreement laid out a clear plan to stop using the harmful chemicals destroying the ozone layer, and to eventually ban them completely. What makes this even more remarkable is that eventually every single country on planet Earth ended up signing on. Every country. That has never happened with any other global agreement in modern history. Companies that made these chemicals had to start creating safer alternatives for fridges, air conditioners, and spray cans. Factories had to shift how they operated. Products on store shelves slowly started changing behind the scenes, all without most regular people even fully realizing how big of a shift was happening. And here's the part that should honestly give you chills, in a good way this time. It actually worked. The use of those harmful chemicals dropped by an incredible amount, plunging by around 99% compared to where it had been before the agreement. Think about that. Not a small dip, not a slow decline that barely made a dent. A drop of nearly all of it across the entire planet in a relatively short amount of time. And slowly, quietly, without huge headlines every single day, the sky itself started healing. Since around the year 2000, scientists tracking the hole have watched it steadily shrink, both in how wide it stretches and how deep the damage goes. It has not vanished completely yet, and full healing is still going to take a long time, but scientists now expect the hole to return to something close to its healthy, pre-damaged levels sometime around the year 2040 for most of the planet. Certain especially cold regions will likely take even longer, possibly stretching into the 2060s before they are fully back to normal. That might sound like a long wait, and honestly, it is. But stop and really compare that outcome to what could have happened. Instead of a hole that spreads across the entire globe and turns sunlight into a genuine daily danger for billions of people, we are instead watching a slow, steady, measurable recovery. A sky healing itself because humans chose to act before it was too late. Scientists have even used special methods to double-check that this recovery is truly because of human action, and not just some random natural shift in weather patterns. And the results confirmed it clearly. This healing is not an accident. It is a direct result of humans deciding, together as an entire planet, to stop causing the damage. There's even more good news tucked inside this story. Researchers later discovered that fixing the ozone layer did not just protect us from dangerous rays, it also helped slow down another huge problem, the warming of our entire planet. Some of those same harmful chemicals were also trapping heat in ways that made global warming worse. Scientists now believe that if those chemicals had never been banned, global temperatures today could be noticeably higher than they already are. So think about what that really means. One global agreement signed decades ago ended up protecting us from dangerous sunlight and helping slow down climate change at the exact same time. Two massive problems, tackled at once, largely because people took a serious threat seriously before it spiraled completely out of control. Now, before this starts sounding like a perfectly wrapped up, problem completely solved kind of ending, it is worth being honest about something. The hole is not fully gone yet. In recent years, it has still opened up to sizes larger than the entire continental United States during certain seasons. Full healing is still years, even decades away. There are also new challenges scientists are keeping a close eye on. Some chemicals used as replacements turned out to bring their own smaller problems along with them. There have even been cases of certain countries illegally producing small amounts of the original banned chemicals, which investigators eventually tracked down and stopped. And oddly enough, scientists are now watching a completely new concern: the rising number of objects being launched into space, since materials from those objects can also affect the upper sky when they eventually burn up. But here is the big picture takeaway, and it is genuinely one worth remembering. A massive, terrifying, global-scale disaster was heading straight for our planet. Scientists warned everyone clearly about what was coming. And instead of ignoring those warnings, the world actually listened and acted together, and it worked. That is exactly why you do not hear about this hole constantly anymore. Not because scientists were wrong, and not because the danger was fake. It is because humanity actually managed to fix it. A genuine happy ending, hiding quietly in plain sight, mostly forgotten, simply because it succeeded instead of failing. And that leaves us with one big question worth thinking about. This is one of the very few times in history where the entire world truly came together to fix a massive environmental threat before it spiraled completely out of control. Could that same kind of teamwork happen again today if we needed it to? If this story blew your mind, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next true story that sounds impossible but is completely real. And let me know in the comments, do you think the world could pull off something like this again if we had to? I would genuinely love to hear what you think. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.